responsible for society as a whole.
We are here
to impact society.
impact society.
Impact society.
Impact society.
Impact society.
As a whole.
As a whole.
As a whole. As a whole.
Impact society as a whole.
We are here to impact society as a whole.
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 Amo ini ang Negros Occidental Impact Coalition.
For us housing officials, as part of our guiding principle, we consider shelter as a right of every Filipino family. Maraming salamat at mabuhay tayong lahat.
Presenting the Organization of Socialized and Economic Housing Developers of the Philippines' Shelter Agenda for a New Decade. The Philippine Private Sector Initiative, a new human settlements and urban development agenda. Institutionalize private sector participation in policymaking under the new Department of Human Settlements and Urban Development. Improving ease of doing business. Expanding housing finance and sustainable incentives programs for homebuyers. Upholding fair access to land through a genuine national land use policy. Redefining affordable housing. Promoting green building, resilient settlements, and post-pandemic approach in designing spaces. To learn more about the Organization of Socialized and Economic Housing Developers of the Philippines, please visit us at www.oshdp.com or email us at secretariat@oshdp.com.
The Department of Community and Environmental Resource Planning, also known as DSERP, is one of the academic units of the College of Human Ecology in UP Los Baños, founded in 1983. It is among the first that offered an undergraduate human settlements planning program in the Philippines. It functions within the harmonizing framework of humans in relation to their environment to contribute towards the national goal of improving the quality of life of the Filipino people. It is DSERP's vision to be a leading institution providing high-quality education, research, and public service in human settlements planning towards sustainable development. Our mission is anchored in the development and promotion of sustainable and resilient human settlements through education of environmental planning professionals with holistic and interdisciplinary perspective, knowledge generation in situational analysis, planning, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of development interventions, and provision of technical assistance to various institutions. Our initiatives are focused on achieving Sustainable Development Goal 11, to make cities and communities safe, resilient, inclusive, and sustainable. The Technical Assistance Program in Human Settlements Planning, also known as TAP-HSP, is the banner public service arm of the department providing technical assistance to local government units in crafting their risk-sensitive development plans. The goal of TAP-HSP is to provide public service by creating institutional linkages with key stakeholders such as the local government units, national government agencies, and non-government organizations, tapping the vast resource of the department in the form of its faculty, students, and alumni, thereby increasing capability through training and continuing education. The components of TAP HSP are capacity development for planners, young professionals mentoring program, model community or city for sustainability and resilience, and praxis or the practice of profession. Over the last 5 years, TAP HSP has assisted in plan preparation for more than 30 local government units in the country. Majority of these are located in Calabarzon, Mimaropa, and Bicol regions in the island of Luzon. TAP HSP also provides capacitation and training through the conduct of short courses on environmental planning, planning tools and techniques such as climate and disaster risk assessments, participatory and GIS-based mapping, and nature-based solutions. Through TAP HSP, students gain actual planning experiences, allowing graduates of BS Human Ecology major in Human Settlements Planning to be qualified to take the licensure exam for environmental planners. At the same time, partners are capacitated to conduct participatory planning approaches, keeping intact the principles of safety, sustainability, resiliency, and inclusivity. In the spirit of public service, DSERP will continue to expand its networks to serve more cities and communities.
Congratulate Habitat for Humanity for yet another successful edition of the Philippine Housing Forum. Over the years, Habitat for Humanity has been a reliable partner of the Filipino people in addressing our growing housing needs. We, in my district in particular, are grateful for the assistance of Habitat for Humanity in building housing for our informal settler families. Only recently, Habitat launched its Negros Occidental Impact Project 2025, which aims to build 10,000 housing units using the cement bamboo frame technology developed by the Base Bahay Foundation. The CBF, cement bamboo frame, is an innovative engineering solution that uses sustainable construction materials and guarantees resilient structures that can resist earthquakes, typhoons, fire, and insect infection. This is an innovation that we need to mainstream in the government's mass housing programs. At a time of increasing intensity and frequency of typhoons due to climate change, we need to develop new housing technologies to mitigate environmental risks and improve efficiency in housing design and construction processes. Indeed, we need to build more green, cost-efficient, and disaster-resilient housing. But beyond design, technology, and process, we also have to ensure the safety of the housing location. In selecting the site of mass housing projects, the government and its partners should consider vulnerability to geohazards and environmental risks, and existing or future transportation networks to ensure access to schools, hospitals, markets, and employment. Accordingly, I filed Resolution number 1390, which calls for a review of the site selection process and housing design standards of the National Housing Authority. We found it necessary to scrutinize NHA's policy after massive flooding in its resettlement sites in Rizal during Typhoon Ulysses last year affected 3,900 families. I understand that the geohazard mapping is already part of the site selection process and is already mandated in the National Resettlement Policy Framework. And NHA has also issued guidelines on this. NHA Memorandum Circular number 2015-0015. But we want their commitment in paper to be translated into actual compliance. Tag-ulan na naman, and anxiety over the danger of flooding is again growing in these communities. We need to assuage their fear by working together to ensure the habitability of mass housing for low-income families.
Recording in progress.
Sa gitna ng pandemya, dapat mapawi ang pangamba ng ating mahihirap na kababayan. The pandemic has exacerbated the vulnerability of families living in informal settlements without adequate space for ventilation, without provisions for sewage and sanitation. The solution is thus clear: to build forward better, uphold their people's right to adequate housing. And this means building housing that conformed with the standards on housing location and structure to guarantee the safety of occupants from natural and health hazards. Our people's interests should be at the center of housing planning and housing development, and on paper, it already is. The National Resettlement Policy Framework, for example, provides that, quote, resettlement programs, projects, and processes must be gender sensitive, inclusive, and participatory, close quote. To strengthen people's participation, we are institutionalizing the People's Plan process in city housing planning under House Bill 8348, which the House passed on third reading in February 2021. I also filed a resolution, which the House adopted as House Resolution number 1677, calling on the Executive Department to expedite the implementation of the provisions of Republic Act number 7279, or the Urban Development and Housing Act, and Republic Act number 11201, that mandates the utilization of idle government lands for in-city mass housing. The cost of in-city housing production has become prohibitive through the years because of skyrocketing land prices in cities, again due to increasing competition for space. In Metro Manila, the result was relocating informal settler families affected by flooding, fire, or transport infrastructure construction to resettlement sites in Laguna, Cavite, Rizal, and Bulacan, all sites far from their sources of income. Utilizing government lands for in-city mass housing will prevent the physical and economic displacement of informal settler families and promote their rights to the city. The United Nations' new urban agenda affirms the role of the city
Thank you for this opportunity to witness the strides you have made and continue to make in building homes and communities of hope even amidst these greatly challenged times. Sad as it is, poverty and homelessness aggravated even more by the COVID-19 pandemic remain our major stumbling blocks to sustain an inclusive national progress. This is not true only in the Philippines, but for many other developing countries as well. And some with human settlements issues far worse than ours. Over 1.5 million Filipinos have been classified as informal settlers. I've known this issue since my MMDA days. Classified as informal settlers by the National Housing Authority and the National Economic Development Authority. And 4.5 million Filipinos remain homeless according to the Statistics Office, the PSA. Recognizing the limited capacity of government to single-handedly address the problem of inadequate housing, decent housing settlements, we acknowledge once again the goodwill of advocates like you, contributing your resources, time, talent, and energy to assist in the resolution of Philippine housing issues. I have been told that this gathering is somewhat a prelude to the upcoming 8th Asia-Pacific Housing Forum this December. All the more that this gathering gains significance as local housing issues will be revisited and discussed, both current and emerging ones, and will hopefully form part of a larger Asia-Pacific regional strategy to address common settlement and urban development issues. While our problem on housing inadequacy are not altogether new, this forum is an opportunity to approach the problem from new and more innovative perspectives that will include not only building physical structures called houses. The Philippine Housing Forum is more importantly an opportunity to build livable, resilient, and sustainable Filipino homes that will form the building blocks of a strong, united, and a progressive nation. Indeed, the Philippine Housing Forum provides the participants with opportunities for elevating awareness on the crucial role of housing in fueling the economy and addressing poverty. Number two, establishing a venue for the discussion of issues and formulation of strategic and sustainable housing solutions. And number three, driving collaborative action, building partnerships, and mapping out networks among stakeholders. Similarly, the topics of both plenary and breakout sessions line up for this forum, especially those that are focused on building partnerships and capacity development for various housing sectors will be pivotal in the formulation of a comprehensive housing and settlement strategic plan and our policy recommendations. We recognize that our current housing issues entail not only building more shelters for the homeless, but as well as engaging private businesses, the academe, civic organizations, foundations, and the like in our advocacy for a decent, comfortable, healthy dwelling places for Filipinos. As the need to stay at home during this critical period to safeguard health and ensure safety remains ever urgent and pressing, I believe that major stakeholders will have to unite in order to address issues on human settlements, especially for poor Filipinos yearning to find a place they call home. With the emerging demand to establish resilient and sustainable communities because of the increasingly debilitating effects of natural and man-made disasters and calamities, this forum is likewise a pivotal initiative in addressing the gaps in our current national housing program and formulating innovative, sustainable, and inclusive solutions. Additionally, enabling policies will be essential in determining local and national level response, planning, and design of housing programs. Legislation will be clearly essential in addressing current and emerging issues in planning and development of settlements and communities. Already existing policies, programs, and strategies such as those relating to government incentives for housing developers may have to be revisited and consequently amended in order to adapt to a rapidly changing national housing landscape. Allow me to briefly mention some of the bills and resolutions of the Senate Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement, which I currently chair, have commenced hearing and discussions. The National Comprehensive Housing Financing Act of 2020, SBN 774, the National Housing Development Production and Finance Act of 2020, the National Teachers Housing Program, the Taal Volcano Resettlement and Rehabilitation Program, to formulate a post-disaster resettlement and livelihood program in view of the Taal Volcano eruption on January 12, 2020. The state of capacity of financing sector to determine the necessity of establishing Housing Bank of the Philippines to centralize the financing and banking functions and address the needs of the housing sector. Lastly, recognizing the impacts of natural disasters and calamities and the people's vulnerability to the loss of life or property. We just commemorated the other day, November 8, the Yolanda typhoon calamity experience. The establishment of adaptive capabilities not only increased resilience, but more so reduce the vulnerability of the people, especially those in distressful living conditions. The central objective is to strengthen the country's institutional capacity for disaster and rehabilitation management and building resilience of local communities to disaster, including the impacts of climate change as well as global health emergencies. Safe, decent, livable shelter is every Filipino's right. Perhaps beyond the physical structure we call a house is the spirit of a home, where family bonds are strengthened, values are nurtured, and the future of young Filipinos are sealed. May this housing forum ignite a fire that will continue to bear light and hope for dignified living spaces that every Filipino family deserves to have. In closing, allow me once again to acknowledge the goodwill of Habitat for Humanity Philippines and all the participants of this forum for the privilege to share my humble thoughts with you this morning. Rest assured that my legislative work as chairman of the Senate Committee on Urban Planning, Housing and Resettlement shall remain geared towards building resilient and empowered homes and communities. Magandang umaga po muli sa inyong lahat. Maraming salamat po at tubayan at ingatan po tayong lahat na po ang may kapal. Ito po si Senator Francis Tolentino.
Okay, mayong aga sa tanan and welcome to our second day of the Philippine Housing Forum 2021. Yesterday, we heard the resounding call and urgency to prioritize housing for government, the private sector, and household investments. Now then, we had Congressman Benitez and Senator Tolentino, which was just replayed now, right? Share with us the whys and hows, while Sarah Antos of the World Bank spoke about the economic benefits of housing investments and how with limited resources, housing investment should be smarter by doing more with less, no? By being flexible and inclusive, and by leveraging private sector participation. Then in our first session on building resilient cities and communities, we saw how important it was to do three things. Not just build homes in any area, but because of the many vulnerabilities in our communities, we need to build stronger, disaster resilient structures that provide safety to our families, and they'll endanger them when disaster happens. Second, to build smarter cities that respond to the challenges of climate change and the rapid population growth, of political and economic stability, so we can put people at the center. And then third, to use our technology and innovation that is scalable, cost-effective, and sustainable, right? Then in the afternoon, in our session 2 on innovative and sustainable housing solutions, we delve deeper into the solutions and how we can build better, smarter, and sustainably without causing more harm to the environment and endangering lives. We discussed low-cost, energy efficient, and sustainable housing solutions. We looked into important aspects needed before building homes, such as land and land tenure. And then we discussed and brought to light an important segment of the equation of building better, which is the construction workers. In today's session, with over 35 policymakers, experts, and practitioners joining us, our hope remains that through our exchange of ideas and experiences, we will together be able to create a synergy that will result in us finding innovative, effective, and practical housing solutions to address the multifaceted, complex, and growing housing issues in the country. Okay, and that this will inspire collective action, transpiring beyond this forum and outside this virtual platform. Now, we need to capitalize on the opportunities and solutions we can replicate and bring to scale so we can together create an inclusive, doable, equitable, market stimulating, and empowering housing, social housing actions that engages everyone. So, because there is a 6.5 million housing gap in our country, because we know that housing contributes to economic growth and improved health and well-being, because we know that housing breaks the generational cycle of poverty, because we know that housing provides endless opportunities for families to transform their lives and maximize their potentials to contribute to social progress. Now, let's replicate together the communities that Habitat Philippines built in Tacloban, Leyte, Bantayan Island, Pinamalayan, Mindoro, Marilog, Davao, Calauan, Laguna, that has helped thousands of families to break free from insecure living conditions, enabling them to live dignified and stable lives. So let us again today, listen to each other, connect, talk, and together build forward for inclusive housing in the Philippines. So with that, welcome, and we move now to our plenary session 3. Thank you.
Welcome to our third plenary discussion. Our plenary moderator is an accomplished individual whose work in the real estate development sector ultimately led to pioneering the development of affordable, city center, medium-rise condominium projects. He is the incumbent president and CEO of Finma Property Holdings Corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Rafael Felix.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to the discussion on financing and investments in affordable housing, so I'll be talking to you a bit later. Today, on the discussion of financing and investments in affordable housing, we will have with us 3 speakers: Mr. Jean-Marc Arbogas, Country Director of the IFC, Ms. Shalito Lunaria, First Vice President of Land Bank, and Mr. Naeem Razwani, Director of Global Financial Inclusion and Capital Markets of the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Housing. If they are online already, can we unmute them and join me for their presentations? Good morning, Mr. Arbogast.
Good morning, Pete. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Awesome. Excellent.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Razwani, Ms. Lunaria. Good morning, everyone. So I believe this morning you will start with your presentations. You have individual presentations before we start the discussion. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So sorry to whoever is hosting, if we can please there. Then we can start, Mr. Arbogast, and then we can continue our discussions after everybody has presented, so we can sync it all together.
Okay, that sounds good, Pete. Thanks again, and thanks for the intro and for putting up the slides. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure and honor for me to be here this morning at the forum, and thanks for giving me and giving IFC the opportunity to present. Let me start maybe by giving you a little bit of background on who the International Finance Corporation is, the work we do in the country, and what's our strategy. So if you can move to the next slide, please. I think you went one too far. That's the one. Okay, so I think there was more on the picture, but that's okay. I can just talk over it. So at IFC, we are today in our third iteration of our strategy. We call it IFC 3.0. And this one is in place since 2016. And what we do, we really place ourselves at the heart of development. So development and having impact is one of the most important things for IFC here. And it underlines our commitment not just to financing projects, but also creating private sector solutions and mobilizing private sector investments that create markets. That's the core of our strategy. In the Philippines, this broad strategy is translated in our country priorities. And in particular, our work in financing green affordable housing fits very well with two of the three main country priorities, which are resilience and job creation. Under resilience, we are focusing on increasing the pipeline of green and resilient housing, and also developing disaster insurance solutions and innovative renewable solutions. Another second pillar, I also want to mention that this relates to job creation, of course, in the housing sector, both direct and indirect job creation, was throughout the value chain, going from construction to maintenance. And that, of course, with the ultimate objective to have impact in creating new markets for the private sector to come in. Next slide, please. Okay, this one is complete. So as a developing country in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, of course, faces unique challenges in increasing the uptake of green affordable housing. Two of the main barriers that we are seeing are the idea that green buildings are expensive and that green buildings are for high-end property only. And because of these notions, around 90% of the 200 green buildings in the Philippines are office towers in Metro Manila. And this is the narrative that we at IFC are trying to change with EDGE, which was developed by IFC. So EDGE is, which stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies, is a green building standard, a rating system, and an online platform designed to make green homes more inclusive, and inexpensive for more Filipinos. We at IFC have also piloted a building resilience index in the Philippines, which included affordable housing projects. And that building resilient index provides a pathway to assess, improve, and disclose the resilience of our homes, which we know is very important here. Next slide, please. And to significantly scale up green, affordable housing, we collaborate across the housing ecosystem. So at IFC, we work with financial institutions, including commercial banks and mortgage institutions, to create green finance products, such as green construction loans and green mortgages. And I can talk more about it later. We can also work with green housing developers by providing investment and advisory support. And I want to mention that despite being the largest development finance institution focusing on the private sector at IFC, we also work with national and local governments, for example, through codes and incentives, which is very critical to our work. And finally, you'll see also on this slide, as I mentioned before, we have introduced EDGE tool in the Philippines. Next slide, please. IFC has achieved significant milestones in the affordable housing sector, especially on the green affordable housing work. In 2005, IFC agreed to provide a 2.25 billion peso loan, approximately $41 million, an 8-year loan to Philinvest Land, which is one of the leading housing development companies in the Philippines. And our loan contributed to increasing the availability of mortgage financing to more lower and middle income buyers. Through the EDGE program, we continue to provide advisory and technical assistance to affordable housing developers to enable them to green their affordable housing portfolio. Then working with the public sector and governments, in 2015, we developed the Philippine Green Building Code, which helps support the green building sector in the country through mandatory work. The code was created from our collaboration with Mandaluyong City on the Green Building Ordinance. And also want to mention a landmark partnership with the National Home Mortgage Finance Corporation. We created the Baila Verde program, which uses EDGE as a criteria. And Baila Verde offers a liquidity facility for housing loan originators, such as developers and banks, and offers lower fixed interest rates of between 3 to 6% and very long terms, up to 30 years, and additional discounts for the marginalized sector. And finally, let me mention that our work on EDGE since 2015 has so far certified more than 200,000 square meters of residential projects, of which 95% are in the affordable segment. And this is equivalent to around 5,000 housing units. Let me stop there. Thank you again for your attention, and back to you, Pete.
Thank you. We will have Ms. Lunaria. Is her presentation ready?
Good morning to the Habitat community, my colleagues in the government service, and to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this forum so I can share Land Bank's initiatives in helping build communities. Presently, the bank has Builders Program, or the Bringing Urbanization and Innovation to Land Bank's Diverse Engineering Resource Support. We launched this program in 2014. And as of September 30, 2021, we have released 134 billion to 452 borrowers nationwide, including housing projects for Yolanda-affected families, military housings, and others. Second slide, please. Builders programs aims to assist contractors by giving them additional funds so they can be partners with the government and private sectors in their infrastructure projects. Contractors engaged in general engineering, general building, and special constructions must have duly updated licenses from Philippine Contractors Accreditation Board or PCAB to be eligible to access this program. Third slide, please. We have two facilities under the program. First is the term loan, which is intended to finance acquisition of equipment and other capital expenditures, as well as the permanent working capital. And second is the short-term loan. It is intended to finance purchase orders, contracts, construction, and other delivery of services, as well as the general working capital requirement. Fourth, please. Based on borrower's credit rating using the bank's internal credit system, we can finance a maximum of 80% of the validated amount of the POs and the contracts. Meaning, if the contractor has a 10 million contract, Land Bank can finance up to maximum of 80% or 8 million. On the other hand, the expansion of the companies can also be funded at 80% sharing, meaning 80% for Land Bank and 20% for the contractor. Interest rate should be based on the contractor's credit ratings and prevailing rates. Next slide, please. Tenors and maturities will depend on the bank's evaluation of the contractor's cash flow and will have a maximum of up to 360 days for short term, while maximum of 10 years, payable monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, and annually for the term loans. It will have a 24% penalty if the loan remain unpaid after maturity dates or amortization schedules. The bank may accept security like the usual real estate mortgage, chattel mortgage, and other credit enhancers like the purchase order and assignment of contracts. Next slide, please. In order for the bank to evaluate the requests of the contractors for funding under the Builders Program, same document shall be required, meaning the SEC registration, PCAP updated license, the 3-year audited FS, validated contract and purchase orders, meaning some of the Land Bank officers will validate your programs with the partners that need. And also the computed net financing contracting capacity and the likes. Kindly refer the screen. Next slide, please. That's it. For more details, please contact the 55 Land Bank provincial centers nearest you and the 3 lending units in the head office. If the contractors are located in NCR, meaning in Taguig, Makati, Parañaque, Alabang, and Las Piñas, please contact SME MLD2 via numbers 8405-7431. While if they are located in Western NCR, like in Quezon City, Manila, San Juan, etc., please get in touch with SME MLD1 at 8405-7340 or through our official online and social media channels shown on the screen. Thank you, and we look forward to accepting your queries and application for our Builders Program. Good day and stay safe.
Thank you very much. First Vice President Lunario of the Land Bank. Well, your last, Mr. Zwani, then we can have a discussion after that.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking at the Philippine Housing Forum. and with colleagues on this important topic. Am I running the slide deck, or would it be run through the administrator for this webinar? Okay, great. We can move to the next slide, please. So overall, I thought that it's important that we narrow down our focus to what exactly are we trying to achieve when it comes to housing in general, and what does the opportunity in the Philippines look like. So we are looking at a market of around $12 billion. And if I go with the global numbers, around $16 trillion is required to address the housing shortfall globally. So if you look at the market, not all investment would always be coming from the public sector. And there's a huge role for the private sector to come in order to address the gaps that do exist. Next slide. So being said that, I think it's also important that to narrow down on the definition of housing. Generally, whenever we have talked about housing, the basic concept that is always, or that has come in by default, is largely around a house, and the finance is all about buying a new dwelling for oneself. And we forget that there is so much more that happens within the housing ecosystem, which involve from people using resources to improve their existing living conditions, to making their housing more resilient before the next typhoon strikes, and so on and so forth. And there's a much bigger market that does exist for families which are not being considered within as part of the formal income sector. And being said that, if the market is so huge, we also need to take into consideration, even though they are not considered by the banks as a resource to be provided finance, they're still improving their housing conditions or still getting into the transactions that do exist. So what are the challenges? The three key challenges are, firstly, they need money or capital to improve what they have or to improve their living conditions. They also need access to material and services. And that is where the concept of the housing value chain and the small, medium enterprises also comes into consideration, because that is from where they are buying their materials. And the last but not the least is the information flow and the social norms. Are people really concerned about that their housing should be energy efficient, or does it make a much bigger value for them to receive appreciation from their neighbors of how good their house looks like? So there is a big difference between what should be done and what is being done. But these are all important considerations. Next slide. Looking at the Philippines market, or in general, in the majority of the sector, what you look at it is, what are the sources from which these end users are receiving funding from? So either they're reaching out to commercial banks, they're trying to reach out to the rural banks, the microfinance institutions, or the government programs such as Pag-ibig and others to request for funds to improve their living conditions. So the ecosystem within the country does exist. Next. But what actually happens within this ecosystem is that each of the actors at a broader level that do exist have their own needs and their own requirements. So if you look at, I've tried to shorten this down or segment them into 4 key categories. So the first one, we can start with the investor. Whoever the investor is, either it's the private investors, either they're international investors or local investors, they really want returns on their investment and they want protection. How would that be available? Because the protection is to be taken at different levels for the risk mitigation purposes. There's a policymaker who wants to increase access to housing as a government, but they also want to provide an enabling environment for other investors and other players to step in. So there's much greater marketing activity that happens within the sector. The end user is the one who is in a lookout for financial products and services and is looking out for players within the existing market ecosystem to seek out those services. And at that point, what is important is to consider, when I say actors within the existing market, they can be formal or they can be informal. End of the day, they are in a lookout for money. And the financial service providers is on the lookout for business opportunity for growth, profitability, and sustainability. However, if we start looking at these four actors in silos, we may not be able to create a solution which provides a win-win solution. Not every solution will have a win-win solution, but there will have to be taken due considerations to find what the potential overlaps are. So looking at this situation, we believe, next slide, that in order to create an enabling environment where every actor has something to deliver, there are four key segments that do exist. There's a low-income household, there are financial intermediaries, either they're insurance service providers, there are technology platforms, there are microfinance institutions, commercial banks. Now digital banks have also started to come up. There's an investor side who provides either wholesale loans, credit guarantees, other investment products, green bonds, etc. And then there are regulators who provide that environment. In order for them to all find solutions, there could be various different ways to look at it. Just broadening our thinking from looking at a binary solution of if I provide an investment, this is what I'll get the return for, but rather to diversify the thinking and looking at how the risks are being perceived and how can they be mitigated. How can access to institutional funding can be increased? And when I say the institutional funding, it is critical because that is where the mass is. And what are the existing market-based solutions that can be adapted? It's not always about creating a new vehicle or innovating to create a new vehicle, but rather also taking into consideration how the effectiveness of existing vehicles can be further enhanced. So as an example, if a credit guarantee facility is already available, what would it take for that facility to provide a much greater impact in the local context, while taking into consideration that the operational intensity and the delivery models should also be improved? Because if the solutions are not created to improve or really rapid or space up the service delivery to the end user, then we're already missing out and extending and further lengthening the time that is required for either home improvement or buying a new dwelling for oneself, and to also look at designing services while on keeping the principles of human-centered design at the center. The reason we believe that the human-centered design principles are critical is because end of the day, even though the client is the one who would be receiving the funds to improve their living conditions, the risk appetite and the risk mitigation factors would have to be taken in. How is the land titling system working? What will happen if a default is done? What would be the liquidation process that would go in? How would I cater to the risk that an investor takes? And how would I cater to the risk that a retail service provider takes, as an example? So all in all, by looking at trying to create solutions, we will be able to enable a market to expand its access for more inclusive housing solutions, ultimately providing greater solutions for lower income families. All in all, this is what we focus on from the Terwilliger Center for Innovation and Shelter at Habitat for Humanity on the financial sector. And we are proud to say that we are working with leading institutions in the country who are keeping the low-income families at the center and trying to find solutions within the limitations that exist within the market. So that is all from my side on the opening statements.
Thank you very much, Mr. Razwani. If I listen to all the presentations that were done, it seems we should have started with yours first. I think it would have made a better story, more logic if we started with yours first, because you started with the problems. Then we come up with the solutions next, given by Land Bank, and then further the improvement of IFC, which is now going into better products because of green architecture. So, but in any case, just to tie everything up. It's really interesting. Let me start with you, Mr. Rozwani. Do you think that a credit system, a formal credit system, credit rating system in the country would help significantly making financing available for the affordable housing sector? Well, I'm a developer and I'm part of SHEDA, so it's kind of primitive, the things that we have to do. I mean, I take my hat off to the banks and especially to Pag-ibig for the funding that they're able to put out there for the affordable housing sector. But it's still a tedious process, and I don't blame them for doing what they have to do, because the credit investigation part, especially in these times, get to be a little bit tricky. So how do you think that would help? And if so, I know we are doing it, but how might we accelerate that?
Thanks, Pete. I think there's no question about how a robust credit system does impact the overall efficiency of the market. So I think that's not rocket science. The challenge usually is the prerequisites that are required before you can get to a centralized credit scoring system. As an example, having a unique identifier for various citizens to link that credit scoring model to it. Who are various credit rating agencies that we want to build in? Is it the central bank that's going to manage, or is there a different infrastructure that needs to be explored? So I think the prerequisites are also critical, but there's no second thought that it is required. It's worked in various markets. I think India and Pakistan in the Asian region have really stepped up from various credit scoring systems, and I think Philippines can definitely also benefit from it. However, at the same time, it is also important to take into consideration that by having a credit system, rather than promoting inclusion, we don't end up promoting exclusions, because you're looking at a market that may not even be fully aware of how their certain practices can impact their access to finance in the long run. So I think complementary services, along with while starting to work on a credit scoring system, financial education, financial capacity building of the low-income families, and so on and so forth, would also be very important. I would like to share that within the microfinance sector in the Philippines, they do use a credit scoring system where there is more of a data sharing happening within the organizations that are active. But as I said, it's not centrally managed, so there can always be ifs and buts around it. But as the credit size goes higher, the solutions that are available to reduce the risk, or because you can't really exclude the risk can only be reduced, and any system or vehicle that is available would always come in very handy. So those are my initial thoughts on that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rozwani. Ms. Lunaria, maybe your perspective from a bank point of view on how that might improve credit availability, especially to low-income housing. I think that's where one of the challenges are. I mean, Pag-ibig is pretty much the sole provider of housing loans at that level. There are certain thresholds that banks will not go below. So and that's really part of the problem.
Yes, in Land Bank, we have wholesale facilities, and that's for the contractors, as I have already discussed, under the builders. And we base the interest rates that we give them on the basis of the credit rating system. But we have been developed it internally. So we use our internal credit rating system in order for us to determine the interest rates of the borrowers. And secondly, we also have our housing loan for the individuals, especially those housing loans that ranges from 4 million and below. We help those, we call it socialized housing. We don't normally give housing loans to moneyed individuals, but to those persons who are the marginalized or the one below level.
Okay, this is not a question, but well, rather this is a comment. From a bank perspective, I can see that how you might have to protect your shareholders. So there might be hesitance there, but precisely because of that, it's what affects the availability to the lower income segment. So I think that's where really a credit system would, a formal credit rating system would help, so that it becomes more objective and less subjective. Anyway, there are a couple of questions, couple of questions that are in the chat box. But before that, Mr. Arbogast, I'm very interested. This has long been a discussion, and in fact, just a week or so ago, I had this discussion with Angelo. How might IFC help in educating developers that green architecture is not as expensive or not as out of this world as we perceive it to be, and therefore, because of that, it's something that we could really adopt. And apart from that, I don't think a lot of developers know that if they adopt green architecture, the lending, or not only the lending rates, the lending amounts to the end users can actually increase because of the green architecture. So maybe you can share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure, Pete. Thanks for the question. Very good. So I think it's true. There is a bit of a misconception out there, right? That if you want green housing, suddenly it's going to be very expensive because you're going to have to implement all sorts of fancy equipment and technology. But the reality is probably, a bit different. I mean, it's true. You can go down that route, but I don't think that's our goal and objective here. So first, to answer your question, how to educate, I think there's just a lot of knowledge sharing that we will have to do all together, right? To bring that point home, that it is not because you're designing a green home that it's necessarily going to be expensive. For example, well, first of all, on the renewable energy side, I mean, the costs have gone down a lot over the past number of years. So even something that people would have thought is really expensive, like solar panels, I mean, the cost came down, but still that might not be affordable for many people. But they are passive solutions, right? So you can, the way you orient your home, for example, the way you build it is very simple. It doesn't cost anything. All you have to do is to orient it differently. You can use, trees, I mean, to make sure that you build the house at the right orientation, below the shade of the tree at the given time of the day. So there's a lot of those low-cost solutions that exist, and we just need to make use of them. And Pete, you spoke with Angelo, and so you're very familiar with the tool I mentioned before, with the Edge tool, right? And this is exactly what we have there to help actually developers to come up with some of those low-cost solutions. And let me also just make another quick plug for it, because it's important. People might also have that misconception that it's an expensive tool. You want to be certified by Edge, it's expensive. It's actually not. It's very low cost, and we provide, or the team provides free technical capacity and support to the developers, to find some of those low cost solutions. And that also, I think, is quite valuable. And no other certification tool actually offers that, at such a rate. And then it's, I think that the branding, right, is also important. And let me tell you what this does also, the branding. And you feel good when you live in a green, and sustainable house, right? But not only them, not only the homeowners. I think it's also, it's got value for on the financing side. I mean, if you first, it's been proven that when a house is built in a sustainable way, in a green way, people who live in there take maybe a bit more care of their own house. And so suddenly it becomes, for the banks who finance those home and those homeowners, it becomes less risky, right? Because the home is going to be taken care of. And then if it's less risky, what happens? The banks can actually lower their interest rates, when they issue a mortgage for those companies. So it's really a win-win solutions for everybody involved.
Okay. Well, you know what? If I continue asking, I can dominate your time, but it will not be fair to the audience. So there are some questions here. Mr. Arbogast, where will the 5,000 housing units built by be built by IFC?
Yeah, sure. So I saw that question, and let me just clarify this. This is not something that we the 5,000 houses were not financed by us; they were just certified by us. But in terms of the location, most of them are outside of Metro Manila, and that's Batangas, Laguna, and even as far as Cagayan de Oro. So just to give you a bit of a sense of where they are, where they've been certified. So it's all over the place, which is good. It's not just concentrated in Metro Manila.
And then for Ms. Lunaria, there's a question on the interest rates for long-term and short-term loans for Land Bank. Would you know where they can get that information readily in case they're no longer here?
Actually, it's available on our websites, but I can give it to you now. Normally, I think the question is are the short-term loans same with the rates with term loans? My answer is the long-term loans have higher rates than the short-term loans since the risks are higher. The repayment of the loans up to 10 years or longer. That's the risks are quite higher. So the banks did not get the money yet, and opportunities that will be given to those funds are stopped. So the term loans have higher loans. And also the ranges. I think there's a question for the interest rates, but I also reiterate that the rates are dependent on the time that the loans are availed.
Okay. Clear.
And also rating. So the range, as of now, the ranges from 5.5% to 7%. And for the, I think there's also a question on the basic requirements on the housing loans. The basic requirements would be the borrower should have no adverse findings. So meaning there's no past due loans with other financial institutions or other lenders. And also we normally evaluate the source of repayment. Thus, we will be requiring the certificate of employment or other sources of repayment. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question? I mean, I'd like to ask this question sent by my colleague to Mr. Razwani. I think it's a very good question to answer. Mr. Razwani, from my colleague in Shada, he asked, what are your policies and program recommendations for the country's financing ecosystem to be more inclusive and responsive? If you can kindly quickly answer that, because I think we're out of time, but it's a very interesting question, I think.
Yes, it's a very good question. I think the biggest policy recommendation that I would give is one size does not fit all. So please, as much as possible, stop looking at the overall market as a single opportunity, but rather start to segment the beneficiaries depending on what their profiles are. Not all beneficiaries would have access to commercial banks. Not all beneficiaries would have access to the solutions by Land Bank. But there are other players that needs to be looked at. Focus on designing better products and services, because that is so critical to ensure uptake. And that is what would also provide you a clear business focus to attract various investors to come in and provide you with either equity or debt financing solutions. But do not forget to focus on improving the products and services that you want to offer to the market. So that is a critical factor. And the rest of the things would follow accordingly without compromising on your sustainability. So it's not about just meeting the needs of the low-income families, but it's also about ensuring that your existence continues so that you can continue serving the low-income families. It has to be a win-win solution.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arbogast, Ms. Lunaria, Mr. Razwani. Thank you very much there. For those that have other questions, I'm sure Habitat would enable those questions to be answered at a later time. Thank you very much, and we'll listen to the rest of the forum today.
Okay, thank you so much, Pete. Right. So, as we all know, it's not just technology, but for housing, we need money. So this session was really important. Okay, so on behalf of Habitat for Humanity Philippines and the Asia Pacific Office, our event sponsors and partners, I'd like to present our plaque of appreciation that reads, this plaque of recognition is presented to Mr. Jean-Marc Arbogast, the IFC Country Manager, Ms. Shalita Lunaria, Head of Land Bank's Retail and Mid-Market Lending Group, and Mr. Naeem Razwani, the Global Director for the Terwilliger Center for Innovation in Shelters, Financial Inclusion and Capital Markets. Okay. And of course, our plenary moderator, Mr. Pete Felix, Board Advisor of the Subdivision and Housing Developers Association, for each of your invaluable contribution as our plenary 3 speakers on financing and investment in housing at the Philippines Housing Forum 2021, Building Forward Better for Inclusive Housing. You've each been very instrumental in elevating housing to the center of the national agenda and seeking innovative, sustainable, affordable, and climate resilient solutions to our country's housing issues. Signed by Lourdes Gutierrez Alfonso, Chair of the Habitat Board of Trustees, and Mr. Luis Noda, Asia Pacific Vice President for Habitat for Humanity International. So thank you very much to all of you. For Habitat for Humanity International.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
We have just finished plenary session 3 on financing and investment in affordable housing. We will now be divided into breakout sessions. You can see on your screen 3 breakout sessions that you can select from. Please simply click the session that you want to join. For session 1, it would be case study on the role of microfinance institutions in housing. For breakout session 2, it's financing small medium enterprises in the housing market systems. And in breakout session 3, local government units financing of its housing projects. See you all in the breakout rooms. Thank you.